So for that, would you guys like to go on to the next one? Would you like a quick break? Raise your hand for a quick break. We've got a bunch of food back there. We have coffee. We have tea. Raise your hand if you want to continue. Okay, we're continuing.
It's rare that we hear each other's voices talking.
What?
It's rare we hear each other's voices.
Well, right. You know what? There's food back there. If you want to eat something, feel free to go back now. This is your moment to go back. We're going to continue because we've got two more amazing storytellers. So feel free to go back. There's coffee. There's tea. All the food that I made came out a little weird. I think it's just because my guy in the straw hat with a cigar is like hanging out. You know, it's funny. You're the second person. Last Halloween, the woman also talked about him wearing a straw hat. So you know what I'm talking about. You see him. Who's the one with the Clorox and the ammonia? That's what I want to know. And will she do my house? I'll pay her.
There's a lot of different meanings behind that.
Yeah. Oh, we'll have to talk about that. Okay, so with this, did everybody get their ticket? We are having a drawing, okay? We're going to do the drawing between the third and the fourth one. But everybody put your hands up in the air, put them down, put them out, put them down, go up, down, round, and back. And I see people up already, so we're taking a break. Okay, 5-minute break. Go and eat something. All right, ladies and gentlemen, come and have a seat. Let's get all those lights off in the other room. I'm so happy when you eat. It makes me happy. The Jewish woman in me feels pleased. And I do come from a restaurateur several generations back. Julianne, move in closer.
I know someone's sitting there.
Yeah, well, you know what? Move that chair up and then you can sit. Guys, come in a little bit closer. Make it really overly comfortable.
That was empty? Yeah.
There's something in here too.
I know, right?
Yay, Laura, she's sitting up. Yay. All right. I want to remind you, if you have not put money in here, artists need money to live. I'm going to pass it around, starting with Mr. Bobby, never mind. Anyway, it's going to go this way, so when it's your turn, you know, I say $15 suggested, but feel free to leave more because artists need money to live and be artists and make our lives more beautiful. Even though so many of you are artists, we know that about each other. The other thing is, if you don't have money to put in, we really want you. And that's what's important. Because storytelling is an art form that requires two kinds of people. Someone who talks and someone who listens. Someone with something to say and someone who wants to hear it. Or ought to hear it. Or is going to hear it. All right. Fran, could you go and... Fran has a list. Now, I'm just going to say, some of you guys, just a few names on it. I don't know where the rest of the names are. But, you know, I'm going to be giving them to Tommy and to Susanna and Maria and Andrew. So you may want to know all about them. You can unsubscribe later, really. It's fine. But if you want to, you know, please help her out for the, you know, next time. She's going to pass it along. Leave your name. You know, if you really don't want it, put a fake one in. You know, it'll bounce on MailChimp, so whatever. Okay? Has everybody gotten and given a ticket? Ooh, right before the next one, I'm going to give some out. Oh, we have prizes. Most of the ones I got at the 99-cent store, but I have one from the fabulous Brooklyn Artery on Cortelyou and Coney Island Avenue. It's Coney Island, right? Right around Coney. Yeah, Cortelyou right off Coney Island. It's a place you should go. I tell you. Ha ha ha. Okay. Is there anything else I need to say? Not that I can think of. I hear some laughing. Is there somebody laughing and having fun up there? Stop it. Come on down and stop being enjoying yourselves. I don't know. I don't really know what it is about people. They always have to have fun. Anyway, I love ghosts, and every story I've heard has reminded me of another one. I have, and the stories that people have told me, and they come. Thanks, Maria, for sharing, and thanks, Andrew. And now we're going to go to somebody who I met online. It's like one of those. It's kind of like my online date over here. Then I found out he had dated 2 other people I knew. 2 other storytellers, and I felt just like I was just one of. But you know what? You're worth sharing. There's enough of you. Tommy O'Malley has like got this spectacular energy. Literally, I met him online. He was looking for storytellers for his show, Big City. And I don't remember how it was. I replied, and it was a Christmas show, and I had this desire to tell a Ukrainian folk tale, which to tell it in one of these moth-like settings is kind of weird. But Tommy went for it. Apparently he had already had Laura Sims and Regina Ress doing something similar. So he already knew the importance of the old stories as well as the new ones, and then he let me tell it. So in front of a nice big drunken crowd. So I really enjoyed myself. You know, I as I looked you up, I just knew you have this like delicious energy, and it's the kind of energy you want to be around, and it's the kind of energy that makes people talk and want to listen to you. So when I put out that I was looking for ghost stories, he was another one that said, I have a story for you. So when people say I have a story, I know I want to listen. So Tommy, I'd listen to you anywhere, anytime. Tommy O'Malley, thank you.
I'm going to take my water as a security blanket. Can I sit? Is that going to work?
You can do whatever you want.
I feel like this is a really cozy crowd. So I like to always, whenever I'm given an order or a rule, I like to sort of see how I can bend it and shift it. So when Robin said that she was looking for ghost stories, I was trying to think, well, what could a ghost be beyond just what we think of dead people coming back? And I started thinking about memory and how memories are in some ways ghosts that stay with us. And then coming here tonight and just seeing Regina and seeing Catherine, who I've done a couple of theater things with, seeing Sandra, who I just met but is from the same part of Boston that I'm from. It all just brings back these memories. And actually my story tonight is rooted in my shared hometown of Rosendale, Massachusetts, which is a very small part of Boston that people from Boston don't know about half the time. So I feel very safe, and you know, I tried to find something that's not traditionally a ghost story, but I'm going to talk about dead people, because that's what I ended up coming back to. And my family has a lot of death. And one of my cousins recently remarked that we're like the Kennedys, except without the money or the power or the propensity for sexual violence. So we're a big Irish Catholic family from Boston. And my earliest memory is of seeing my baby sister in her casket. And I know, I'm going to talk about death in ways that you might find a bit abrasive, but that's because that is my first memory. And I remember her purple body that was caked in makeup, holding 2 daisies like this. And I remember my mother losing her shit because she wanted rosary beads and roses, and she wanted her hands crossed. And I remember taking my little brother's hand and walking up. I was almost 5, he was almost 4. We're Irish twins. Yeah, you know it. No birth control in my house. And she was the 5th of 5, Allison. And that really obviously shaped the direction of my whole family's lives, but really mine and my younger brother, because that's what we remember is the dead sibling. And anybody who has a dead sibling, especially one who died in youth, knows that the most important member of the family is going to be the dead sibling. They're the one that was going to be president. They're the one that was going to live out all of the parents' unrequited dreams. And that's true. Allison's, it would have been on October 17th. It was the anniversary of her death. in 1987. You can do the math, I think that's 28 years. And every year on that day, my mother texts us a picture or emails us of a pink rose, because the morning of Allison's funeral, we walked outside and there was one pink rose that had blossomed. And that's something that my family does, is when somebody dies, we turn them into an inanimate or organic object. And they become a symbol. And those are the ghosts that attach to us. Somebody had said, you have ghosts that stick with you. And in my family, the ghosts that stick with us tend to be people that we were related to. And so Allison has become a pink rose. And so my entire house, my mother has more floral patterns than you can imagine. Anytime anyone sees something with a pink rose, they give it to my mother. And after my sister died, my father, in a sense, became a ghost. He became a memory of what he once was. He was just the shell. And we would all look at him and remember what he was and try to forget what he was becoming, which was increasingly depressed, increasingly nonverbal, and increasingly ill. My father, around the time that Allison died, stopped drinking. And for an Irish man of my father's generation, the drink was his best friend. And the way my father would talk about alcohol from that point forward was just so romantic and like a friend that he had really loved and lost. And he talked about alcohol. I'd never heard him talk about Allison. I was going to say he talked about alcohol more, but yes, that's true. But he literally never mentioned my sister's name again. As far as I can remember, I've never heard him say it. And for 13 years, we watched his health slowly decline. And you think when somebody quits drinking that it's going to get better, but actually for my father, things just kept getting worse. His diabetes got a lot worse. The neuropathy set in. He couldn't feel anything below his legs. I remember we were driving home one day from Mass, and we stopped at Dunkin' Donuts, which is like an institution in Boston. I don't think people outside of Boston understand how important Dunkin' Donuts is. It's part of our cultural identity, and my father was driving home and he had his Dunkies between his legs, and he gets out of the car and it had spilled all over his crotch, scalding hot coffee, and he didn't notice because of the neuropathy. And my mother is a tough Irish woman from South Boston, grew up the youngest of 10 kids, knows how to street fight, and in her very compassionate way said, "You didn't fucking feel that?" To my father. And he didn't. There used to be a game, we couldn't drink the orange juice in the house because we had to save it in case my father went into a reaction, because he was terrible at regulating the insulin. So his sugars would go high and low. And I remember doing the test on his feet, you do the finger prick, and his blood being as low as 9. And at 0, you're dead. That's it. Gone. So I remember that's the lowest I ever saw it. And he would go into these, it was like he was drunk. He was like in a blackout. He'd just look at you and become really nonverbal, and but those sort of like heightened stakes were what we lived with day by day, because you never knew. The ambulance was at my house, almost weekly towards the end of his life, which came in June of 2000. March of 2000, March 17th, St. Patrick's Day, I remember my father saying, you could see the lump. And he said, "I just want you guys to know they found a little bit of cancer, and they're gonna do some stuff." And that was about the extent of what we knew. And the next week he started chemo, and then he was in the hospital. He was at the Faulkner Hospital, which is the worst hospital in the world. And they misdiagnosed him, almost killed him. We're giving him the wrong medicine. Then he ends up at Brigham and Women. Great hospital. I recommend it if you ever have anything wrong with you. Oh, really? That's where some of my siblings were. I was not. I was born at St. Margaret's, now the Carney in Dorchester. And it was a really rapid decline. He had 3 months of the cancer and then gone. And the good thing about having a big Irish Catholic family, all still centered in Boston, is that after his death, everyone was around. And we became even closer than we already were. And we grew up around the corner from my father's parents, around the corner from my father's brother, down the block from my father's cousin. Everyone was within walking distance. And my father's brother, who lived around the corner, had 3 kids about my siblings and my ages. And he had his eldest daughter, Jill, was was somebody who always terrified me. She was about 9 years older than I am at the time. Guess still is. And Jill was somebody that I really gravitated to after my father's death, because my cousin Jill was in a family, even though we're Catholic, my dad's side was just really waspy in this way that they didn't talk about things. My mother's side, her parents were off the boat from Ireland, where her mother was, and they would just scream about things. So one side screamed, one side just didn't talk. And we lived approximately like closer to the side that didn't talk, even though if energetically my siblings and I were screamers. After my father's death, we were closest to the side that didn't talk. They were the ones that were around. They were there. But Jill had no filter and never had a filter. But she was also like kind of a bully, which was something that I related to because I'm kind of a bully. And it was, and I'm, recovering bully, I would say. Maybe I'm not, I don't know. Because it depends on who you ask. But Jill was the type of person who would pin me down and spit and suck the spit back up over my face repeatedly. She was my t-ball coach. I remember at the end of the year, after the season was over, we had a barbecue at her house. And I was 9, she was probably 17, 18. She gave me a wedgie so bad that my butt bled in front of all of my teammates. And I tried to play it off like it was cool, but I just started crying and slowly walked around the corner to my house when nobody noticed. But after my dad died, I was 17. Jill at that point is 26. She was living in her own apartment. She was a teacher in the Boston public schools. She was teaching special ed. She developed compassion for other human life and an awareness that it existed. And for some reason, she thought it would be a great idea to invite me over to her house, to her apartment, which was around the corner from my house and her parents' house, to have a seance for my father. So Jill's brother and I went over there. In my mind, this was like a week after he died. It could have been longer, but it doesn't matter. It was still very present. And the thing about my dad was he was somebody that I didn't really know in his life. He was removed from his own life. He had checked out. So my older siblings, they kind of knew the man that he tried to forget in the last 13 years of his life. But my younger brother and I didn't really. But I had one connection with my dad. When I was in 6th grade, that only I had, when I was in 6th grade, I went to school on an island in the Boston Harbor. And every morning, my father would drive me from Rosendale to South Boston, where I would get the ferry. It's about a 20-minute ride. And we would listen to the morning show on Oldies 103.3. And we developed this bond over a shared love of Motown and the British invasion and Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons was especially something that we both loved. And we would sing along. Well, I would sing along and he would just sort of hum along in his, vacant way. But it was the most animated he would become. And I remember there was this, they would do these concerts. Oldies 103 would host these free concerts on City Hall Plaza. And Frankie Valli and the Four Seasons were going to be performing. And my father said, "Do you want to go?" And I said, "Yeah, let's go." And so it's the only sort of date really that I really remember going on with my dad. Just the two of us was driving into Boston, standing on the brick patio in front of City Hall Plaza, which is the ugliest building you've ever seen in your life, and just having the most beautiful experience. And hearing Frankie Valli with that falsetto, and it just, every time I hear Frankie Valli to this day, I think of my father. So I go to Jill's house a week after my father died, we'll say. And I'm feeling like, universe, give me something, please. Because I never connected to the Pink Rose with Allison, because I didn't really know her. I don't remember her alive. I only remember her in the casket. But my father, I'm 17 when he dies. This is in me. I'm his DNA. I'm praying that there is some connection. Please let there be a connection. She turns out all the lights. She pulls out the Ouija board. It's got the little triangle with the little magnifying glass. And I'm like, oh, this is bullshit. Immediately. I just didn't believe it. And they're easing me into it by trying to connect with their grandmother. It's my cousin Jill, her brother Matt, and they're trying to connect her. She had died sometime around then, I don't remember. And they're connecting with her. They're trying to connect with a cousin of theirs that had passed, and to connect with that cousin. And then it's my turn to talk to my father. And I shut my eyes and I asked the board, what concert did we go see? And I can feel it moving, and none of us are moving it. And it goes to F. And Jill says, it's at F. And then I feel it go, and I go. And then Jill says, it's at V. Does that mean anything? And I said, oh, fuck, that's Frankie Valli. And after that, I started hearing my dad, and I started talking to him all the time. I came out of the closet about 2 years after he died, and death does horrible things to people. That's something my aunt, who has experienced a lot of death, once told me. And I don't know if it was because I was out of the closet, I don't know if it was because of things that were never dealt with in relation to my father's death, but an explosion happened, and there was a big fracture in my immediate family. And my mother stopped speaking to me, and my siblings stopped speaking to me. And we were separated by distance because I was in college in Texas, and they were living still in Boston. And the distance made it easy to deal with, but then college ended, and I moved back to Boston, and my family still wasn't talking to me, and it was brutal, and I was sinking lower and lower and lower into this depression that I just couldn't escape. And I began to really know my father. I began to really feel him. I began to really understand those weird silences where he would just sit and stare at you. And I began to really understand the loneliness and feeling completely out of control of your destiny. And I began to understand what the march toward death must have been like for my father, because I didn't want to live. But when I moved back to Boston, the person that was there for me right away was my cousin Jill. And when I came out and my family stopped speaking to me, it was really upsetting. The one person whose reaction I can really remember was Jill's to my coming out. She lived 2 doors up from my aunt at this time. And I was at my aunt's house standing in front, and Jill pulls up in her car. She gets out of her car. She's got a Diet Coke in one hand, a cigarette hanging out of her mouth. And she looks at me and goes, "Hi, Tommy. I heard you came out." Like it was completely normal. So I moved back to Boston, and I'm like hanging out with Jill and her husband. They got 3 little boys, and I'm going to their house in Hyde Park. I'm living in Southie at the time. It's like an hour-and-a-half bus and train ride to get there, but it was worth it because it felt so normal, and it felt like family, and I needed both of those things in my life because I was really losing control. We would smoke a lot of pot together. And then Jill started asking me if I knew where she could get Vicodin, and if I knew where she could get other things, and I was like, nah, I don't really know about that. My cousin Kathy is into that shit, but I'm not. And Kathy's on my other side of the family. And she goes, "Oh, really? Well, we should hang out with Kathy sometime." And without really thinking about it, I was like, "Oh, yeah," because I was close to Kathy. I was like, yeah, we should all hang out. And we hung out, and we were all smoking pot, and it was cool. And then I realized, Jill was, asking me about drugs in a way that wasn't just hey, I want to, check out every once in a while. It was I need this. And she was I could see the white knuckling, but I was 24 and I didn't really want to acknowledge what was happening to this young mother of 3. I didn't want to be responsible for it, so I just did what I'm really good at, and I checked out and I backed away. And a year went by and I hadn't really talked to Jill. And 2 years went by and I had kind of forgotten about that period in my life, and I was still smoking a lot of pot on my own, trying to check out because I'm still at this point not connected to my mother or my siblings. And I'm feeling increasingly isolated, and then one day I get this message on Facebook from Jill's mother. "Hey Tommy, I have to ask you a question. Jill's in the hospital. We had to have her committed. She's been using drugs, and she said that she got her connection from you. That her guy Kevin in Southie is someone you introduced her to." And I'd never heard of Kevin. And I realized that my cousin Kathy probably knew who Kevin was because Kathy's from Southie. And that Jill was trying to protect Kathy so that her source, her supply line, wouldn't be cut off. And I said, "I'm sorry, Marianne. I don't know who Kevin is. I didn't have anything to do with that. And then about 2 years after that, I'm further removed. I don't know what's happening. I get another message from my Auntie Marianne. Hey, Tommy, I hate to ask you this again, but Jill's back in the hospital. She's relapsed again, and she said you helped her get some drugs. And I said, I haven't talked to anybody in about 4 years now. It's not me. I'm sorry. I can't help you out. And I was so angry because Jill telling her family that I had gotten her these drugs, that I was her supplier, had made it so that I really just, not on my own terms, but on her terms, couldn't talk to anybody in my family anymore. And there's no telling somebody that you didn't get somebody drugs. Because, I smoked pot with her, and I kind of knew she was going in that direction, but, like, I'm not the one. There's just too many but what. So rather than answer the but what's, I just checked out. And I completely stopped talking to everybody. And then in 2010, I was feeling the lowest I've ever felt. I was smoking a cigarette on my back porch, and I was flicking the cigarette off and watching it fall to the ground and lighting another one and flicking it and watching it and just thinking, I could jump off this third floor balcony and who would know the difference? So I called my mother because I just knew I didn't want to actually jump off the balcony, but I didn't know how to stop myself from doing it. And I hadn't talked to my mother in a long time, and I said, if you're my mother, if you care about me, if you care about this life you brought into the world, you'll come here now and you're going to end this because I can't live like this. And my mother got in the car and she came over. And she had my sister who's like her pit bull, that guard dog. But we just kind of talked, pretended she wasn't sitting right there, and my mother and I did this, and we were able to kind of start to build a little bit of peace. And bit by bit, I started to feel a little bit more whole. Then I reached out to one of my aunts on my dad's side, and I sort of reconnected with her. And I reconnected with a cousin. I reconnected with another cousin. And I was starting to feel the temperature of the water and see if it was going to be good for me to get back in. And the one person I never could bring myself to reach out to was Jill, because I had so much anger toward her. And then last July, I was invited to my dad's side. There's an annual summer party, and it was the first time I'd been invited to it in years. So I went, and Jill was there, and we found out that Jill had gone to get her IUD removed. And when she went to get her IUD removed, the doctor said, I can't see it. I can't see it. And she said, what do you mean you can't see it? And he said, I think you need to go see somebody. And he referred her to an oncologist. And they discovered that Jill had stage 4 cervical cancer, which is incredibly rare for a woman of 40 years old. And she had not gotten a pap smear in 7 years since the birth of her baby. Had let it go, had sort of dealt with pain and just pushed it off and buried it and pretended that it wasn't there, and I don't know, numbed herself in whatever way she needed to. I can't speak for how she did it. But I remember seeing Jill chain smoking at that party and just looking terrified. And she'd been teaching the year before that. She'd been teaching in Dubai. She'd moved with her 3 sons to Dubai for the year. She was planning to go back to Dubai that September. And this is early August when I saw her. Late July, early August. And they were confident that they were going to be able to treat it because she was young, she was relatively healthy, but there were a lot of unknowns because stage 4 cervical cancer is pretty serious. Immediately they put her on chemotherapy. She's losing her hair. She's moving in with her parents. Her parents are taking care of her 3 boys because she and her husband are sort of estranged. And she bit by bit starts to fall apart and deteriorate in a way that was very similar to my father. And I didn't see her from that party again until the family Christmas party at the beginning of January. We always do it after Christmas just to make it easier. And the first weekend in January I saw her again. It was the first time I'd seen her with the bald head. And the thing I remember most is the eyes. She was just watching everybody because she knew that it wasn't good. and I could see that she was looking at the world through the eyes of a dead person. She was already a ghost, looking at all of us, projecting the life that we were going to continue once hers stopped. And the fear that she was able to just convey with her presence, but at the same time, the strength to keep going forward was just, it was this combination of things that I'd never really seen before. Because even in my father's death, he was still vacant toward the end. I never saw the fear. I never saw the strength. I just saw the same eyes that used to sit and watch the TV and smoke Marlboro Reds. But with Jill, I was really seeing her take in the world for the last time. Because she had not been planning to die the way my father had been planning to die. On March 20th, Jill did end up passing away. And it was a really shocking thing, even though we knew it was coming, because this was my generation. And we've had a lot of death, but usually it's a little bit older. And I remember at her funeral just feeling so lost. Like, knowing that this person who had been vibrant, who had so many problems and so many flaws and so many assets, was just not going to be there anymore. But that morning, as I was getting ready, I felt something on my chin. And I looked down, and I have this giant cystic pimple that has exploded on my face. And it was painful to touch. It felt like there was like a golf ball underneath. And I've gone through my entire adolescence without having any sort of pimples. And I said, "You motherfucker, Jill." And since then, I have had a really bad adult acne problem since March that I've been going to see the doctor. And I understand now why my mother had to turn my sister into a rose, because it helped my mother remember Jill. I'm just really annoyed that I have had to turn Jill into a pimple. That's my goal.
Everybody wash your face carefully. You don't want to go and get acne. Okay. Big round of applause for Tommy O'Malley. I've heard a lot of Irish Catholic. My husband, where is he? Tom's Irish Catholic. He's New York. Brooklyn Irish Catholic. You Irish Catholics have weird stories. You really do. You have. Oh, we've got a couple of them here. I mean, you know, it makes my Jewish life seem very mellow. Another round of applause for Tommy. We love you exactly